what we were saying, when we think about food insecurity and food justice and food deserts, what resonates to me is hunger. Hunger is defined as a discomfort or weakness caused by lack of food coupled with the desire to eat. This is so near and dear to my heart as I faced hunger in 2013, 2014. Both of my sons were home due to medical reasons, so they were not getting the meals at school. My mother was home fighting stage 4 breast cancer, and the cancer was even in some of her lymph nodes. My children are not well and require a certain diet. And it's so amazing that even with the SNAP benefits, the amount we were getting wasn't enough to make sure that we had an adequate amount of food, healthy foods to feed my family. And due to economics and transportation issues, even though the food pantries were available, I wasn't available to get to some of the pantries. One, because I was going to a doctor's appointment with one of my family members every day of the week. Two, the stress and the embarrassment of the questions being asked when you just needed a hand up, not a handout. And lastly, because most of the foods that were offered, they couldn't consume them anyway. And so I sacrificed myself and survived off of sugar water for 3 months. I didn't complain. My desire was to keep my mother alive by any means necessary, to make sure that my sons had 3 meals and snacks. So I kicked in instantaneously into survival mode. No one in my community knew, except for one young man, when I would sit out on my stoop at night and I would have a nice big glass of water filled with sugar. And we were talking one night, and there was some children that was running around, and someone tipped my cup of water, and that young man seen the embarrassment in my face. He didn't say anything to anyone. But the next day, my children and I were invited to go to a cookout. On the next day was a day that I earned the name Big Mama. Because at that cookout, I prepared all the food. I cooked the majority of the food. And I made sure that everyone had a plate of food, and I was the last person to eat. Now we had plenty of food, and there was leftover food, and there was even some food that we hadn't even cooked. That young man filled up my deep freezer. And I can say from that day forward is when my hunger story ended and my giving story began. If I even suspected that one of my neighbors were hungry, I was a giver. I did ice cream socials in the community. I remember we had a blackout. It was at the end of the month. All the SNAP benefits was done. I started defrosting things out of my freezer and cooking for my neighbors. That's exactly what this constitutional amendment is going to do. It's going to stop those hunger stories. And it's going to start a different chapter in West Virginia, where we can allow West Virginians and the people who even pass through a reason to stay, a reason to rebuild and to succeed. Oftentimes when we think of hunger, we only think about children. And if you know me, you know I am about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we mustn't forget our seniors. We mustn't forget our veterans, foster care children, grand families, those facing addiction, our neighbors who are houseless, our students in higher education who cannot apply for SNAP benefits. And we mustn't forget our neighbor who lives on the side of us. This is my truth. And now I want to share this platform so other truth tellers can allow me to be a truth teller on the floor. When I talk to my colleagues, 100 of us in the House of Delegates, it is the people of West Virginia who are resilient. But because I am an elected official, I know that each and every one of you deserve the right to food. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Delegate.